The federal government has revalued gold before. Not suggested it, not proposed it, actually done it. Executive Order 6102, signed in 1933, forced Americans to surrender their gold at $20.67 per ounce. 9 months later, the Gold Reserve Act reset the official price to $35. That's a 69% revaluation, overnight, by decree. The U.S. Treasury still holds 261 million ounces of gold. It's still valued on the federal balance sheet at $42.22 per ounce. That price was set in 1973. Gold trades today above $2,600. The gap between the official price and the market price is now larger than it's ever been. And that gap represents something most people haven't calculated: latent purchasing power that can be activated without printing a single dollar. If the Treasury revalued its gold to current market prices, it would generate over $670 billion in balance sheet equity, instantly. No congressional approval required, just a signature. This isn't theory, it's accounting, and the executive order framework to do it already exists. Right now, everyone is watching the debt ceiling, the arguments, the theater, the threats of default. That's the right hand. The left hand is holding 261 million ounces of gold that haven't been marked to market in over 50 years. The entire conversation around federal solvency assumes the Treasury operates within the constraints of tax revenue and bond issuance. But there's a third option that doesn't require either. It's been used before, it's legal, and it's sitting in vaults in Fort Knox, West Point, and the Denver Mint. Gold revaluation isn't a fringe idea. It's been floated by former Fed officials, mentioned in economic white papers, and embedded in the legal structure of the Treasury itself. The reason it hasn't been done isn't because it can't be done. It's because it hasn't needed to be done. Yet. April 5th, 1933. Franklin Roosevelt signs Executive Order 6102. It requires all persons to deliver all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve by May 1st. The penalty for noncompliance? 10 years in prison, a $10,000 fine, or both. This wasn't a wartime emergency measure. It was monetary policy. The government was resetting the system, and gold was the lever. Once the gold was in federal hands, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934 revalued it from $20.67 to $35 per ounce. The Treasury's balance sheet expanded by billions. The dollar was devalued against gold, making U.S. exports cheaper and providing immediate economic stimulus without new taxation. It worked, and it set a precedent. The executive branch has the authority to revalue gold unilaterally when the system requires it. That authority was never rescinded. The Gold Reserve Act remains on the books. The Treasury still holds the gold. The only thing that's changed is the market price. Here's what most people don't know. The U.S. Treasury is required by law to value its gold reserves at the statutory price set by the Secretary of the Treasury under 31 U.S.C. Section 5117. That price is
currently $42.22 per ounce. It was last changed in 1973, not by Congress, but by executive action. The Treasury doesn't need legislative approval to change this number. It needs a policy decision and a signature. The moment that number is updated, the accounting changes, the balance sheet changes, the equity position of the United States government changes. At $42.22 per ounce, the U.S. gold reserve is worth roughly $11 billion. At $2,600 per ounce, it's worth $678 billion. The difference is $667 billion in unrealized value that can be realized with a single administrative update. This isn't liquidation. The gold doesn't need to be sold. It just needs to be revalued. And once revalued, that equity can be used as collateral, as a balance sheet offset, or as backing for new instruments. The Treasury has done this before. The legal framework is still active. Let's do the math everyone else is avoiding. The U.S. Treasury holds 261,498,926 troy ounces of gold. That's the official number reported to Congress. At the statutory price of $42.22, the book value is $11.04 billion. Gold is currently trading at approximately $2,600 per ounce. Multiply 261,498,926 by $2,600. The result, $679,897,208,600. That's $679.9 billion. The difference between book value and market value, $668.86 billion. Now consider this. If the Treasury revalued gold to $10,000 per ounce, a figure that's been suggested in multiple financial models as a potential equilibrium price in a debt crisis scenario, the total value would be $2.61 trillion. The instant equity gain would be $2.6 trillion. At $20,000 per ounce, a number that shows up in hyperinflationary models and gold standard recalibration projections, the value becomes $5.23 trillion. That's larger than the entire 2024 federal budget deficit. It's larger than the GDP of every country except the US and China, and it doesn't require a single new dollar to be printed or borrowed. This is not speculation. This is arithmetic. The only variable is political will. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. If you own gold, you might think you're protected, but revaluation doesn't just change the Treasury's balance sheet, it changes the incentive structure. In 1933, the government didn't ask nicely for gold. It compelled surrender because the revaluation required consolidation. You can't reset the system if private holders can arbitrage the new official price. Today, that same logic applies. If the Treasury revalues gold to $10,000 or $20,000 per ounce and allows private holders to sell into that price, it defeats the purpose. The value has to stay within the system. That means restrictions. That means reporting requirements. That means at minimum taxation on private gold transactions at the revalued rate. At maximum, it means confiscation with compensation at the old rate, just like 1933. You might think that can't happen in modern America, but the legal precedent was never overturned. Executive Order 6102 was repealed in 1974, but the authority under the Trading with the Enemy Act and the Gold Reserve Act remains. The Treasury retains the power to
regulate gold transactions during national emergencies, and national emergencies are declared regularly. Even if confiscation doesn't happen, revaluation alone destroys the safe haven narrative. If the official price jumps to $20,000 and your gold is taxed or restricted at that level, the asymmetry disappears. You're not outside the system, you're inside it, subject to the same revaluation forces as everyone else. This doesn't happen overnight, but it doesn't take years either. Phase 1 is rhetorical. Officials begin discussing dollar stability, gold's role in monetary history, and the need for creative solutions to fiscal imbalances. This shifts the Overton window. It makes revaluation thinkable. Phase 2 is technical. Treasury officials and Fed economists produce white papers on balance sheet optimization, gold as a strategic asset, and the legal mechanisms for revaluation. This builds the procedural groundwork. Phase 3 is political. A crisis emerges. Debt ceiling, banking failure, foreign divestment from treasuries. The crisis provides cover for emergency measures. Phase 4 is execution. An executive order is signed. The statutory price is updated. The Treasury's balance sheet is recalibrated. Markets react. Gold trading is suspended temporarily for market stability. New rules are implemented. We're somewhere between Phase 1 and Phase 2 right now. The conversation is happening in policy circles. The mechanics are being reviewed. The crisis hasn't materialized yet, but the pieces are in position. I don't make predictions. I read documents. I follow the legal structure. I watch what's possible, not what's popular. The U.S. Treasury holds 261 million ounces of gold, valued at a 1973 price, while the national debt exceeds $36 trillion. That's not an accident. It's a loaded gun sitting on the table. Whether it gets fired depends on how bad the alternatives look. Most people won't hear about this until it's already done. By the time revaluation is announced, the mechanisms will already be in motion. The safe haven assets will already be inside the regulatory perimeter. The math will already be settled. If you understand what's on the Treasury's balance sheet, and you understand the legal authority that's never been rescinded, then you understand why this isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a policy option, and policy options get used when they're needed. The question isn't whether the government can revalue gold. The question is what happens when they decide they need to. Subscribe if you want to see the left hand before everyone else is staring at the right.